everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Let's Talk Astrology. Today, we are delighted to have Cameron Allen back on the show. Cameron is an astrologer, health consultant, and herbalist. So thank you so much, Cameron, for joining us again today. And how are you doing?
I'm good, Kyle. Thanks for having me again. I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited for what we're about to talk about too. How's everything been? I feel like it's been so long since I talked to you.
Yeah, it really has. Yeah, it's been a few weeks, and I'm excited to speak with you again because now you're in the process of doing the workshops, the holistic embodied astrology, and I'm excited to get more in depth about that today with health and relating as we go through the zodiacal the process. So yeah, let's speak about that. So you've done the first workshop, which is the Aries one. So do you want to just tell the viewers about what's going to happen through these workshops through the year and each signs that we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So holistic embodied astrology is really just, and it's specifically focusing on the zodiac signs as like the basic components to understanding astrology as a whole, but not just understanding astrology, but how everything in the reality can and does relate to astrology. You know, so even the way I teach it and the way I share is always about, hey, these are the reflections in reality that I'm seeing the zodiac signs. What about you? Right. And so it's like always about like, this is my orientation. And here's a way to think, not what to think. So that you can really, really know, and you can sink into it. So where, like I was saying before, it's not about Aries is aggressive and Aries is this and Aries is that. It's like what Aries is a bunch of different things added up, right? Mm-hmm. There's an architecture to Aries. So we have and we'll get to that in a second with the slides.
That's a wonderful way of explaining it. So really the essence of the signs in a holistic sense, rather than, maybe the keywords or the buzzwords that we talk about when we're talking about each sign. Is that correct?
Exactly. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. In that way, yeah, like I said, like anything can translate into astrology in an embodied way rather than something that's like from the head or us speaking jargon to where like other people can't understand what we're talking about. That's one thing that I found that was like such a big barrier when I first was practicing, like the things that I was learning and like how to directly apply with other people who didn't necessarily know what I was talking about. And so that was like how I like came to the process of like looking at it from this perspective too.
Fantastic. And I believe we've got some slide examples you'd like to share with us today.
And this isn't it the all in all of what we're going to be talking about during each zodiac sign, but this is just like a little outline or like a little preview or like a sample. So it always just starts with like the holistic embodied astrology. I'll talk about that I'll give like a definition of that every time. And then this one just happens to be from the one we did first, which was Aries. Mm-hmm. And so then we'll go into what I call, and what I've been taught to call, the energetic architecture. In the energetic architecture of every single zodiac sign, it'll have a polarity, which would be a more active or passive sign. It'll have an element, which will be fire, earth, air, or water. It'll have a modality, which is cardinal, fixed, immutable. And then it'll also have a planet. So we'll take the time to like put those components all together, and we'll see how it makes up the actual zodiac sign in and of itself. Like we were saying, rather than just starting at like, well, what is Aries? Aries is aggressive. It's the pioneer. And it's like, well, why? Why is it the pioneer, right? Mm-hmm. Because we have this outward going energy, this active energy at the polarity of yin or yang, or active and passive. It's active. The element is fire, so it feels this special sense of destiny or purpose. In the mode, or the mode of operation is the way I like to call it oftentimes, is cardinal. So it wants to get something started. So I have this special sense of destiny or purpose that I feel inside of me, and I want to get it started. And the planet is Mars. And Mars can often be perceived as what we call like a hothead. But in this case, it doesn't have to be a hothead as in anger. It could be a hothead as in, I don't actually know what I'm doing, but I'm going full force with it.
Yeah.
And that's what it takes to be a pioneer.
Absolutely.
Right. So we take that word pioneer, that's just a word in the beginning, but then we put all these components together and show the energetic architecture of why it is that way. And when we know why something is that way, then we have an understanding. And when we have a deeper understanding, that brings the ability to bring harmony and peace to that energy wherever it's at in the reality, or at least be of assistance and of service to it, to where we judge less and we help master more. And that's what it's all about.
That's a wonderful description. And really, it seems like you're speaking to me like a skilled versus an unskilled sense of what we're talking about.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. Because like, it's totally a time where, because I mean, in our culture, you know, like burnout is such a big thing these days. And like, so then sometimes I have friends who like go to the opposite direction. They're just like, well, I deserve to relax and just chill. And I'm like, well, now you're like doing nothing. You know? So like we need spectrums. To like, exactly. So it's like, we need to learn how and when to use the archetypal force rather than try to abandon it because we've been misusing it and lacking understanding and how to be in relationship with it.
That's a wonderful description for it. Absolutely. All about timing, essentially. And that's what astrology is about as well. Timing, you know, the right times. Yeah.
Exactly. 1,000%. Yeah. And so also for every zodiac, I mean, well, really not just for every zodiac sign, but going through the workshop, I always just bring up quotes that just awaken like the essence of what's going on with the sign for me as well. And so this quote here, always trust your instincts. They're messages from your soul. So even sometimes I feel like we will stop with Aries being just impulsive. And it's like, well, yeah, but like, what is an impulse? An impulse is something from deeper inside of us that's like trying to push us in a specific direction. And just because we have an impulse doesn't mean that we have to become habitually impulsive. Right?
Right. I like that.
But when we can listen to the instinctual impulse, we can learn to start going in a direction without having to pontificate and ponder it excessively or compare it to our society and what we should and shouldn't be doing. Right. And it just gives us a stronger more grounded orientation towards what it means to be in a relationship with impulse rather than being impulsive.
And this is a wonderful quote for it, you know, always trust in instincts, you know. So, you know, again, going back to time and being messages from your soul, this is a fantastic quote to use for this particular sign. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And even like not every single time, but it's like very often throughout talking about holistic embodied astrology, I'll go back and just be like, oh yeah, remember what we were saying about the energetic architecture and how like the polarity is active, the element is fire, so it's going and it's going. It's cardinal, it's trying to initiate something, and it's Mars, so it's like intemperate heat. So it's just, you know, it takes a lot of energy to just go in a new direction. And so when we're going in that new direction, and then, you know, even thinking about Mars and how it severs ties with things, it's like even in this present moment, what I'm doing, I would have to sever ties, Mars, and go and like have a lot of energy to go in a new direction, right? Which would be the active fire and cardinal energy. It's taking me somewhere new. And so just being able to get really, really familiar with that energy, not only how it's manifested in reality, but for the people who are in astrology and they already have the ABCs down of astrology, then they'll be able to look at where that is at in their chart and how they might be in excess or deficiency of enacting that in their lives as well.
That's a wonderful example. And, you know, getting back to the separate and it, you know, to go in a new direction, it takes courage as well, as you've alluded to. So if we take it on a wider societal point of, you know, the great resignation, you've talked about burnout, you know, friends that we might have, and it takes a lot of courage and to separate your current place in society. And a lot of people have left their positions where they've been in the last year or two and trying to go in a new direction and trying to, you know, fulfill their sole purpose rather than being, you know, fodder for greater society. So that's a great way of explaining it. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful reflection. Yeah. Yeah. And then so also with every single zodiac sign, we'll talk about the constitution. And yeah, I'll talk about that more elaborately during the class, of course. But the constitution just being about the way that someone's body and psyche will have a tendency towards being made up or constructed. And the thing that I really, really, really love about understanding constitutional theory and being able to apply it is that so often in our society, we're coming from a place of judgments on like what I should or shouldn't eat, or, oh my gosh, my body looks this way or that way. And like going into fad diets and things like this, when really, if we can understand how our body is constituted and put it together, and how our mind is constituted and put it together, then we can have an understanding that guides us towards how to actually be in relationship with our body and our mind, not from a place of shoulds, not from a place of social norms, but from a place of actually understanding how I'm built, right? In so many different traditions, you know, the idea of like know thyself is so important. And so when we bring in the Constitution, we can move past judgments and go towards knowing thyself as I am right now, as I have been, and how the world has influenced me, but also moving forward. If I do want something to be different, if I do want to change, I'm changing from a place of self-understanding rather than what I think I should be when I'm actually not built that way.
Absolutely. And that's a wonderful description, that element of self-awareness and that astrology can bring when you're looking at your own chart, you know, when you talk about the constitution or the ways in just understanding yourself, that self-awareness, and applying that to health, diets, what's in for the individual, rather than, you said, you know, following fads or societal, you know, nonsense that we're in tuned with media and all that kind of thing, and bringing it back to yourself and centering yourself again. Well, that's a beautiful description.
Yeah, absolutely. Also with the holistic embodied astrology, we'll be talking about not only what I have presented here as like, as far as like the physical component and the psychological or the physiological component, but we'll also be talking about like the psychological and then also like the spiritual components of each sign. But for now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the physical and physiological components, and how Aries, or every single zodiac sign, is going to rule in an area of the body. But it won't just rule an area of the body, it'll rule a part of the body as far as like an organ system, and it'll also correspond to experiences that we have in reality. And the way that these go together with Aries was, I showed the example of it rules the head because it's the first zodiac sign. And so every single zodiac sign after will go down till we get to our feet at Pisces. But with Aries, it rules the primal brain, right? So it's about this very instinctual nature, right? Even when you think of impulse, again, it's not necessarily about thinking. Like when you're in a situation where you need to like be in survival mode, you don't need to be pondering on things. You don't need a philosophical framework. What you need to do is get going. And it's just, you know, it's like, it's built into us. And so just like being able to understand that, it can bring like a better relationship with it. And so it also corresponds with the adrenal glands, which has to do with the fight or flight experience. And so this can also bring like really good reflections when, like, if you're sitting in front of somebody and they're talking about how they're stressed out or they're always in go mode, and they have like 4 planets in Aries, where you're like, hey, like, I know this might be your like natural predisposition to do this, but like you really want to get in like tune with what is your relationship with your adrenal glands? Like what herbs can we get you to work with your adrenal glands? Can you get a book about just reading about the adrenal glands and like experience of being in fight or flight mode and like what that does to a person? Sometimes I even think about like how in ancient times they had like specific remediations, and they had to do with like gems or like potions and stuff like that. And I'm like, wow, just knowing the zodiac signs, I could like give somebody the remediation of reading a specific type of book, right? Like this, it's a different kind of remediation, right? It's more, and I would just call it like a more modern, or I would just call it a more modern type of remediation. So it's definitely different. And also that can definitely help remedy people's situation.
Absolutely. And as you do this month by month, so the next one, I think on April 9th, is going to be the Taurus aspect. So you might have someone comes to the workshop, you may be stellium in Taurus, and then, you know, you're assigning it with certain body parts, but you get really in depth into what to maybe to focus on in those person's life, or just for general information. But this is fantastic detail in these slides.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so I'll also correspond things, especially in the Aries talk. I was really like excited about talking about catabolism too, because a lot of times with Aries or the Mars energy, we think of it as like malefic. And when we think about malefic, oftentimes people go directly to like bad or not good. And we have to remember like catabolism is like breaking things down into smaller things so that we can have energy, right? It's like we have to have things broken down. So not only are we like getting an understanding of like what malefic might mean, but also understanding the necessity of having malefic forces in our reality. If you were always building, then yeah, it would just be too much and it would topple over. So we always have to have things to take away. But that's just another reflection. Absolutely. And for that, I'll just stop there because that could be a lot. Yeah. And then in each one, and then there's other things in between the physiological, psychological, spiritual. There's another topic that I talk about that I'm not quite remembering at the present moment. But we also just talk about the configuration of each rising sign. So since it was about Aries, we'll talk about Aries and what it might mean for it to be in the first house, or the first place is what they used to call it in astrology. So I just use places. It just feels more comfortable for me. I also talk about like how in astrology, they're not just, because instead of saying houses, I call them the places and the spaces. So it'll be talking about a place in your life, but it also will be referring to a space within your consciousness. And so being able to see how those two things can connect and how they very often are a reflection of the same thing. And it's not to say that they always are. However, it's really, really good and helpful to know what the reflection is of the place in life that is happening versus the space and consciousness that's happening, and how our consciousness and how our life is playing out. They do have a relationship, even though that relationship is dynamic and it's not always necessarily this one-to-one ratio or this one-to-one correspondence. And then also I'll be speaking on, usually in most of them, I have like an animal, right? So all of it's about nature and how nature is reflected in each zodiac sign. So usually I'll bring in an animal. And for this one, it was really easy because Aries is the ram and like, it's going around like headbutting stuff, right? It's like so easy. With some of the other ones, I actually don't necessarily use the animal or the icon or the image that comes with the zodiac sign, but something else that will like still show a good expression of that zodiac sign through something or an animal in nature. I brought this cactus because it has little spiky things, but it's also like it exists within a desert like type of environment. Not only does it exist within a desert type of environment, but a lot of different cacti have a tendency towards also being like healing towards the Aries energy because they have a lot of moisture, or they know how to contain moisture, and they also know how to protect themselves. Why? Because they live in an environment that's very Aryan. And so they've learned to adapt it to the situation, which is something that, is important. It's really important because people who have a lot of moisture and water quality inside of themselves, they might want to learn how to grow a little bit of spikes.
Yeah. And I love how you bring it back to the fundamentals. So, the element, polarity, mode, and the imagery, and bringing it back to the fundamentals, what we can physically touch as well. The cacti, you got the fire image there as well, the hot, dry area, the desert there. And it's fantastic. And as you go through each month, as we get into Taurus season, you've got the fixed earth, quality, and then the association with the planets, and then the symbolism as well. And for Aries, you've got the ram here. So I think it's a wonderful way of bringing it back to the fundamentals, which is so important, I think, in astrology.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, like I was saying before, the more that we can see from this lens, and then people take it and be creative in their own way, it's like it truly becomes a universal language mechanism that we can use. It's like, even sometimes I feel like there was times in my life where I wanted to be talking about the astrology, but I was around people who didn't necessarily speak that language. So instead I would start talking about other things. Like I would talk to people that had like a lot of Aries, and I would start talking about like how to get a fire started. Instead of being like, well, you got Aries here and blah, blah. It's like, well, like, have you ever started a fire? And then talking to them about that instead.
Yeah.
But really, I'm talking about the same thing. And so like, even in a sense, it like brought me even more fulfillment. And I got to like transmit what Aries would want to say to that person through a reflection in nature.
That's a really good point, because really astrology does come down to communication. So whether you're working with clients, we're giving talks on people who might not know the astrologies of what we're talking about, but again, bringing it back to the fundamentals and using language that's palatable maybe to the people that you're dealing with who might not know the ins and outs and the terminologies. And I think that's a wonderful way of you doing that. That's fantastic.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then also for every single zodiac sign, I'll talk about in herbal correspondence. So most often I'll use one herbal correspondence that is sympathetic, which is just meaning it's similar to that zodiac sign. And then I'll talk about one that's antipathetic, which is like not like that zodiac sign, so that we can see the reflection of how we can bring more of that zodiac sign into being, into our body through ingesting something, and then also how to calm it down through ingesting something, so that we like get an orientation towards, just working with those zodiac signs through the seasons and just through life in general.
Wonderful. And you being a herbalist as well, so you've spent quite a bit of time dealing with certain herbs, and you work with clients and then kind of recommend certain herbs. Is that how it works for you? How does that process work?
Yeah, so since my practice is, I kind of have like a dual practice. So a lot, like with astrology, a lot of times it's a little bit more complex because I'm doing the astrology and we're working on the mental and emotional part of it. And sometimes herbs do come in with it, but a lot of times people already are like on, like they already have their own herbs. They're already on certain vitamins and minerals and stuff like that. So sometimes I do modulate that. But when it comes to like when I'm back in Memphis, Tennessee, I'm mostly just an herbalist. So when I'm being an herbalist as like the primary thing that I'm practicing, then I'm always giving herbal recommendations or invitations is really what I call them. But when it comes to my astrology, I don't always. It just depends on what kind of situation we're talking about. Because sometimes too with my astrology practice, I also, instead of like people would assume that I would recommend an herb, but they end up leaving with 3 like physical body exercises that they do for a few weeks, and they come back to me, and then we move forward from there, which also might end up looking like herbal recommendations that come months later rather than like in the initial consult.
I love how you do that. And again, going back to that holistic sense of, if we just talk about health, the physical health, emotional well-being, again, back to the physical well-being and, diet and eating. And I love how you encompass all of these factors together, it seems, to put, everything together. That's fantastic. That's wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes with herb stuff too, like I just didn't even think about it for a second, but sometimes I just invite people to like, hey, like move over to soup and then start adding rosemary to that soup.
Right.
Whereas like sometimes I guess from my herbalist perspective, I'm like not giving them a tea or a tincture or something like that to drink, but just little recommendations like that can like make big differences in people's lives, especially like we said, like if you couple that with some psychological adjustments, emotional unpacking, and like some physical body practices as well.
Wonderful. Fantastic. Well, thank you for showing the in-depth details as well. I love how you put all this together. And again, so the next work, you've already done the Aries workshop, but the great thing about these workshops is that not everyone has to attend live. That people can, if they buy the workshops, they can still watch the replays of the workshops. And the next one is going to be on April 9th, and I believe that's from, I've got it written down here somewhere. Is it from 11 till 12:30 p.m. Pacific? Is that correct?
It's either that or it starts at like 12:30. It's one of those two.
Yeah, I think I've got it written down. So 11 to 12:30 p.m. Pacific. But I'm going to put the link in the description below this video. So for everybody watching, you can register and sign up. And the beauty about this is you can either go to individual workshops of Cameron's, or you can buy a special rated package for the whole 12. of the package of the workshops to watch, which is fantastic. And I believe, again, is that April 9th? I think I'm repeating myself.
Yeah, it's April 9th. Yeah, no, it's April 9th. Yeah, you got it. Yeah. And also we're going to have the availability for if you're taking each individual class that will be in connection outside of just the actual class, because there's going to be embodiment practices that we do that come with each zodiac sign. So we'll also have a chance to be in connection after just the initial webinar, which everybody who took the Aries one already, I didn't put up the videos yet, but I'm gonna be doing it in the next 2 days because I've been traveling a lot and stuff like that, just so they know. But yeah, just everybody knowing that you're not just going to get just that webinar, that workshop that one day, but you'll also be able to be in connection throughout the rest of the month.
I love that concept of it's not just, a workshop or a webinar that you go to, you listen to it, take in the information, and that's it. But this is a continual process, or you're encouraging participants to engage through the months and practice what you've been talking about, and really having it as more of an engagement through the year, as opposed to just signing up for the workshop, watching it. It's a participatory thing that people are going to be involved in as well. Is that correct? As you were saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
Wonderful. So this fantastic. Again, I'm so happy to have you back on the show. It's always wonderful to come back on again, and I hope you'll come back again when we have you got any more classes or workshops in mind? I know this one's for the whole year. I don't know if there's anything else on the horizon for you at the moment.
For now, this is it right here. And then also, like, I'm gonna be speaking at a few conferences this year. I'm speaking at NORWAC and I'm speaking at ESAR. So those are the only things I could think of right now. I have a bunch of other stuff going on behind the scenes too that just aren't coming out yet, but that's it for now though. Yeah.
Wonderful. It sounds like you're very busy at this moment, and in so many different areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's wonderful. Well, again, thank you so much for joining us, Cameron. And your website out there is what's the website people can visit just to see more about your work?
www.cadreamplanet.com.
Wonderful. And you're out there on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook as well, all the social media?
I'm on Facebook. I don't really talk too much on Facebook, but on Instagram, my handle is @CADream6, and on Twitter it's @CADream7. And also I write monthly articles for Yoga Journal, so you can go check those out too. I have a bunch of articles on Yoga Journal. If you just type in Cameron Allen, Yoga Journal, Astrology, you'll see a bunch of different types of articles there too.
Fantastic. Well, again, thank you so much for coming on. And for the viewers out there, if you would like to register for these workshops, again, we're going to put the link in the descriptions below, so you can click on there, look at any particular workshop that you might like, or again, if you want to involve yourself in the whole package, you can. And again, you don't have to attend live. If you miss a particular workshop, you can always go back and watch the replays, and we'll have all that information there. So thank you everyone for watching. If you like the content, please like and subscribe, and have a wonderful day. Thank you.